Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 239, recorded at Big Dog Studio in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is made possible by...
If you'd like to learn more about making herbs a practical part of your daily life, pop on over to The Practical Herbalist and take a look at the many articles, the opportunities to learn, and you can get all of the podcasts from Real Herbalism Radio there too. That's thepracticalherbalist.com.
Now here are your hosts.
I'm Candace Hunter.
I'm Patrick Hunter.
And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio.
Hey, Candace.
Hey, Patrick. How you doing?
I love DiMaggio's teas.
Yeah.
And I am not an herbal tea guy.
I know. It surprises me every time. Like when I brewed up the angel tea for you last night. Oh my God.
The whole kitchen filled up with that smell. I was stunned. I was like, what the heck?
Yeah.
And it was so nice. I know it's funny because out of the three that he did send us, he sent us his box, his 3 box, and I think there's Tiger and there's Angel and then there's some other one I can't remember. But we've had the other 2, and we didn't have Angel until last night, and I think the Angel was the best of the bunch. So
of course you do.
Maybe it was because I needed it. Maybe there was something there. Because whatever. I mean, because sometimes that is the case. You know, the medicine or herbs that we don't need, our body's like, yeah, I don't like this. And the herbs that we do need, it's surprising how much like, oh, this is really sweet. I mean, you've come up to me and like, taste this vervain. And I'm like, oh, God. And you're like, oh, it's so good right now. I'm like, then you need it.
Right.
I don't need it. And wow, you.
I think it was the mints and the Melissa that is in angel tea that were probably 2 of the big ones for you, because you are like a minty fellow.
Yeah, I mean, I like mint, don't get me wrong, and mint and Melissa, I love lemon balm, and I love that lemony flavor without the citricy, the citrus of it.
Yeah.
I enjoy that. And after looking again at the jar of herbs and how colorful and so well put together, you got to me thinking back about what he was talking about is, that biodynamic farming and the ability to let the herbs, exist amongst the other plants and not give them a great life.
Right. Yeah.
So,
we were not meant to live in monocultures. Neither were the plants.
No.
That's not how they evolved.
No, not at all. So when you get a field of echinacea, for instance, and it's all cultured out and there's not a single other plant than echinacea in there. It's not that it's not going to be a decent plant or harvest, but it's just nowhere going to be near as potent as that same plant in the wild or, in an area where it's not treated as, we're watering it and we're fertilizing it and we're making it this, we're making it that, and we're giving it a good life. I mean, and I always bring this example back to it, and that's grapes and wine. Every time someone says it was a great year for this, it was because there was a drought. There was a drought,
or there was a hurricane.
Yeah, or there was a frost late, or there was a whatever, depending on the wine or the grape. But there's something that stressed the grapes. I mean, I think about our grape plants. We don't water them.
No,
we don't do anything, and they flourish and they go to town. And by the time that they're starting to come about, they're sweet. They're really, really good. And the year that we had a really wet summer, they were nearly as good as they are now.
Yeah.
So you need that stress. And, to be fair, it's like people. People are really discovering intermittent fasting as being one of the keys for weight loss and also health. And, back in the day when we were, running around harvesting, twigs and berries, we were fasting all the time.
Yeah.
Because you never knew where the next meal was coming from. So you would forage and eat, and then you would go on a period of time where you wouldn't. And I think our problem now isn't that we have a lack of food. We have an abundance of food. I mean, every single moment there's food around us. Good food, bad food, doesn't matter. It's there. There's calories everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. So we never put our bodies through any kind of serious real stress, really.
Right.
I mean, and I can't, this is our area, our country, not, I mean, I'm sure there's areas
in the world where people struggle for food. Yeah.
We're very lucky where we live. With that, I'm telling you that we have this many calories.
Right.
But in general, the American diet, there's just calories everywhere.
Right. And we don't have, the vegetables in our diet, even if you go completely vegan as we actually mostly have done, even if you go completely vegan, if you're buying your vegetables from the store, you're probably not getting biodynamic vegetables, which means you need to eat considerably more poundage of vegetables to get the same amount of nutrients than, even our ancestors of only like 3 generations ago.
Well, I think about our very modest garden. Our tomatoes are so much better than the store-bought tomatoes. Our chard is better than the store-bought tomatoes. Our cucumbers are even better than the store cucumbers. I mean, cucumbers, they have that same kind of flavor, and they're always watery, and but ours have like, the skin changes differently. It has a thicker, flesh in there. The seed, the moisture in the seed, it's just totally different. Yeah. And that's that idea, because I mean, we're not really friendly to our crops. I mean, they get a lot of sun, and we water them occasionally. We might forget it for a little while, and maybe we'll throw some coffee grounds over there at them or whatever. But we're really crappy gardeners. Yeah, I mean, in comparison to people I know. I mean, our neighbors are really, really good compared to us.
Oh, yeah.
Really good.
Most every other gardener on the face of the earth is probably really caring and loving to their plants compared to us.
Right. And I'm sure their bounty is higher than ours.
Yeah.
But that's what I guess I'm saying, is that the bounty doesn't have to be great if all of the things that are happening to develop really, really rich foods.
Yeah.
Well,
and part of that is, like Tony said, is the soil health. So if you have multiple different plants going into your mulch, essentially multiple different plants growing together, their different roots, their different needs, contributing to the microbial. I would have
the microbiome.
No. It's the fungi in the soil, the fungal network in the soil, mycorrhizal. I always say it wrong.
Okay.
But anyway, contributing to that, you've got all these different plants contributing to it. It makes that network stronger. It makes the soil healthier.
Yeah, one thing he did
and that
point
gives
out,
you more nutrients.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because what he was pointing out is that the plants don't just take from the soil.
Yeah.
They give back.
They give back. Yeah.
And that was important, because I never really thought about that before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of where, like, when I look at his angel tea, he's developed it for calming and for nourishment. And the nourishment part is things like the oats and the nettle that are in there. And the oats and nettle coming out of his farm are most likely going to be nutritionally far superior to those that are coming out of one of the large monoculture farms that are sourced by a lot of herbal companies.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's quality versus quantity. And personally, I go for quality anytime I can. I can't always afford it, but, when I can, I go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that is the other thing, too, is that being able to afford some of the stuff does, you have to make those decisions as well. Mm-hmm.
But doing your own gardening helps you to be able to afford that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in your own garden, you don't have to plant all of your tomatoes in one spot and all of your beans in a different spot. You can intersperse in your corn somewhere else. Mm-hmm. You can put the 3 together, which is, in all honesty, that's one of those native practices, at least of the Pacific Northwest. And I think it's a larger regional, it's not just a regional practice of planting, companion planting, essentially.
Right.
Because the plants help each other out.
Do you like marigolds and tomatoes?
Yeah. Like marigolds
I never understood how they did that before, like how that worked, until talking with Tony. Like, the marigolds do something to the soil that helps the tomatoes next time around or whatever.
Right.
Or like, I think when we did one year where we planted tomatoes and basil plants in the same, like it was tomato, basil, because I had read somewhere they were good companion plants. Yeah. So not only that, but they taste really good together. So I guess
they do.
So I guess maybe that's.
And they do like similar conditions. They both like the heat. Yeah,
both Mediterraneans, I guess. Mm-hmm. Well, one was South American, right? And then they got over to Italy and different things.
Yeah. I just know that tomatoes and basil both require really hot days, or they seem to like really hot days. They prefer more consistent heat. In our area, we often have the temperature drop
at night
considerably. So during the daytime, you're sweater, or you're in shorts and you're fanning yourself off because it's too hot. But at night, you're putting on your jeans and a sweater because it's gotten pretty cold. It's chilly. We
Yeah.
usually have that kind of temperature change.
You have a 30-degree shift sometimes in a
And
day.
the tomatoes and basil don't really like that very much. Where we came from, where I grew up, in Minnesota area and in Michigan and Pennsylvania, I know my grandmother's garden was the same. All of those areas, you put your tomato plants in and you don't want them too crowded because they won't grow well. Those areas also don't have the same radical temperature shift from daytime to nighttime.
Not really, not in the heat of summer. No.
Right. And I took me a very long time because I am such a lousy gardener. but I kept trying different ideas about how to plant our tomatoes and have them produce well. And I know other people out here seem to do okay with them. Mm-hmm. And I'm unwilling to do things like get out a cloche and put it on at night and then off by day because I'm too lazy. I'm not going to get that done. Like I said,
we miss watering, so.
Yeah. But this year I put all of our tomatoes in a very small, they're very crowded. And it was because I had too many tomatoes and didn't have the heart to throw any of them out. Mm-hmm. So I have 6 tomatoes that are crowded into the space that I would have otherwise used for like 3.5 or 4 tomato plants if I was in Minnesota gardening there. So I crowded 6 of them in, and then I used one fence-like device to have them trellis on all 6 on the same fence, like it's down the center of the 2 groups of 3. And then on the end of that particular space, I had just enough space to have 2 traditional cages. So I had the traditional tomato cages with the tomatoes in them. Those ones aren't doing very good.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they're taking all
the crowded ones are very happy.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Maybe it's because there's a inherent like ultra microclimate around all the ones that are thing where they stay cool, and I think those 2 at the end like shelter the other ones from that direct south sun that we get.
Right. Well, I'm pretty sure that the tomatoes that are doing really well are doing really well because they're holding their heat through the night much more longer. They're protecting each other,
right? And
that's causing them all to flourish. And the 2 on the end are too cold at night. Whereas back, in our gardens of my youth, you needed to have the space because those were all warm climates, not southern warm, not Florida hot, but they were warm and they were very humid climates.
Yeah.
So the plants needed space to breathe. Otherwise, they'd overheat, and that was not good. And they never cooled down much at night there because of all the humidity. So my personal current working theory is plant your tomatoes really close together if you live in the Pacific Northwest. See if that works.
So you're saying crowd them.
Crowd them a bit, yeah.
Crowd them up. Well, it's a heck of an experiment. I mean, I'm enjoying going by and picking one occasionally and, in that. So, I mean, it's, like I say, plants are going to develop potent medicine when they're under stress versus when they've got everything they need.
Yeah.
Just like when we were going back talking about people intermittent fasting, I think that's what they've discovered is that they're getting healthier by eating less because they don't need to eat more.
Well, and I think the other thing too, at least, I was reading a book called Grow a New Body by Alberto Villoldo.
Okay.
And he was talking about intermittent fasting. And what he essentially said was if you devote no more than 6 hours to eating in the day, that doesn't mean you eat it for 6 hours straight. But his version of intermittent fasting is you have lunch or breakfast or whatever you want to call it at noon, and then you eat whatever meals make sense for you through the day. And at 6 p.m., you have your last meal at or before. And then you don't eat again until the next day at noon. Mm-hmm. What you're giving yourself with that schedule is, what does that come out to? 18 hours of
18 off.
Yeah, 18 hours of fasting, during which time your body finishes its digestion surprisingly quickly, and then it spends about 12 or 14 hours or so really focusing on repairing your systems, repairing parts of your body, repairing organs, detoxifying anything, getting rid of wastes appropriately, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So his suggestion is that Paleolithic or early humans, even humans as little as 2,000 years ago, had schedules where they were far more likely to go for long spans between meals like that, and that during those longer spans and time off, their bodies would do all this repair work, which would mean that when they did eat, they didn't need to eat high calorie density foods as much. They may need high calorie density foods for, fighting the war, like Achilles might have needed more higher calories than, your average Joe, but,
Right.
But it depended on what they were doing and what their lifestyles were, how many calories you actually needed. Their foods were more nutrient dense at that time, just by virtue of the fact that they were organic gardening. They had no other options. There were far fewer humans to garden for, and the soils were not being depleted, at least not nearly as rapidly as they are today. I mean, we do have evidence, and you can't quote me on this because I know that my memory is fuzzy on it. I want to say I think it was Veloto talking about there being evidence that part of why the Mayan Empire fell was that they depleted the soils in the farming areas around the city their main city.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing happened in Europe, in ancient Rome. I can't remember for sure, where they depleted. They had the population base that they had in the city grew and grew and grew. And then they reached out, to get foods from the farms. The farms went a little bit further, but because of the amount of transportation they could do, there was a limit to how far you could really.
Right.
There was no refrigeration and that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
And they forced the land to produce more and more crops and didn't do crop rotation and started doing things that looked more like monocropping, and that sort of thing, and depleted the soil, which then meant there was no food for the city, which caused the city to atrophy.
Hey, did you get over to see the Herbs in Action Summit? Did you see the great website they have? Mudpot Design created all of it. They know how to make an idea and in a short term turn it into a business. If you have an idea or a company that needs a website that isn't some cookie cutter freebie web service, Mudpot Design can help you out. They offer free consults to help you focus your idea, or if you have a good website, try to make it even better. And more importantly, get found with SEO services. If you're in the need for website or marketing services, check out mudpotdesign.com. It's interesting because as you were speaking, I was thinking about what the modern problem is: carbon sequestration and the ability for soil to hold so much carbon.
Yeah.
We don't have that now because the commercial farming, if you look at the soil, you pick it up, it's dirt. I mean, it's gray, it doesn't have worms in it, doesn't have bugs in it, doesn't have humus, doesn't have anything in it. It's just a vehicle to hold the plants, and then they get fertilized.
Right.
And we had read a book last year called Kiss the Ground, which, brought all that to the light and wanting to move us back into that, like you said, the crop rotation, putting livestock back in the fields, doing those things to, make that breadbasket productive again, like it was. I mean, the funny thing is, for thousands of years, the buffalo roamed and they pooped all over the place, and the hooves trampled it in and mulched it in, and then there was winter and the whole thing, and they were part of that whole system.
Yep. And all those plants had grown up.
Right. And then they died, and then they went back in, and and it was just this natural system. And then these massive prairies were just loaded with this thick dirt. And by the time that, I think with the drought, and by the time that we got to the Dust Bowl, I mean, it was starting to go. And then now it's, that soil doesn't hold water, doesn't do anything. And I think we need to make a shift.
Yeah.
I know there'll be a lot of people out there that don't agree, but you know what? If you don't agree, that's fine, but at least read the book and then tell me if you agree or disagree.
Right. Well, reading Kiss the Ground was part of what inspired me to work on getting a CSA and just committing ourselves to doing that, because I know that I'm not a great gardener. I mean, we planted a few things like the tomatoes and I wanted to make my own pickles, so we did a few of those things, but I'm not attentive enough to be able to produce enough crops to feed my family all year round. So my solution was, I'm going to buy a share of the produce from a local farm where I know they're gardening organic. I know they're not monoculturing their crops, and they're small. And they're offering, this particular farm offers young people an opportunity to get credits for their high school program, but also to learn a trade and explore whether or not they themselves want to follow in the footsteps of someone like Tony. So to me, that supports my community, that supports the people involved in the farming, and it supports the earth and all of that, and gives me, a variety of good vegetables that I wouldn't otherwise be able to produce myself because I'm just not that good.
Exactly.
And it was because of Kiss the Ground that I finally, it's not that I didn't intellectually know that was a good thing. And, I've done CSAs off and on through the years, but that was the point where, after reading that book, that I decided, nope, we're committing to this. We're going to do this every single year. That's just the way this is going to have to roll.
Right.
And I feel like I'm more, it was not too long after making that commitment and, signing up for the CSA. It was actually the second year that I'd signed up where I was, for the first time, that was like the first time I did a CSA 2 years in a row from the same place. So for me, that was the point of real commitment where I actually really said, yep, I'm doing this again. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm actually serious about this for the rest of my life. And that was the point where Tony walked into my life and I had an opportunity to taste the herbs that he's growing. And, honestly, I was astounded because, I've tasted good herbs that have come straight out of the field. I've had ones that, like nettles that grow wild and that are just doing their thing. His were every bit as good, if not better. They feel like plants that have been really cared for.
Yeah. Well, if you want to visit our website, there's a little ad on the side for sacredblossomfarm.com.
Oh, yeah.
You can go there and you'll find a coupon code that you can use if you decide that you want to buy some of his herbs.
Yeah.
And then as a side note, we get a little bit of affiliate on that. So we hope that you do it just because the herbs are great, but then it also helps benefits Real Herbalism Radio, the Practical Herbalist, and Herbal Nurse Society. So
yes, and I'll make sure that we put the discount code in the show notes too.
Okay.
So that if people go to his site, even without using the link from our website, they can use the discount code and get a percent. I think it's 15% off or something like that.
All right. Well, hey, we do have a question this week.
Ooh.
An Herbal 101 question.
Yay.
So I don't have really cool Herbal 101 music. Herbal 101. So this comes from J.E. and I'll just say J.E. And he's wondering if strawberry plants that obtain from irregular commercial locations can have their leaves used instead of wild strawberry leaves. And generally curious about the extent and type of differences. Thank you, and you have super impressed with your website. Well, J.E., Candace, what's the guy to do if he buys a commercial strawberry plant?
Commercial strawberry plant leaves can be used in the same way. They have the same properties as wild strawberry leaves. That's the simple answer.
Right.
More complex answer on that is wild strawberry leaves are wild, so they're in the wild, so they are
more potent.
Probably going to be more potent. They've had to work harder to survive than domestic strawberries.
Domestic cultivated strawberries.
Yes.
Yeah.
The second part is when we hybridize, which is what all domestic strawberries are, we select for, and I'm talking about those who are not doing like genetic manipulation with microscopes and...
No, crossbreeding.
But crossbreeding, when we're crossbreeding and all of that and hybridizing that way, we're selecting for the biggest, juiciest, sweetest strawberries.
Right.
The fruit.
Yeah.
Which means that we're selecting away from sturdy leaves with lots of constituents and health in them.
And opting for larger fruit.
Yes. So that means the plants that result in a domestically grown one are going to have much tastier fruit, which may actually be more full of nutrients and that sort of thing, but it may not because it's also going to have a lot more water. The big, juicy, tasty strawberries have more water to them than the little tiny wild strawberries.
Yeah.
The tiny wild strawberries also tend to be a little bit more on the sour side as compared to the big, tasty, juicy strawberries that you get from the strawberry patch that the farmer grew.
Right, because they're not maximized for sweetness.
Right. So the hybridized ones or the domestic strawberries are going to have a higher percentage of water and sweetness or sugars, natural sugars, but still sugars, and a lower percentage of other types of nutrients because the plant's busy creating all that water and all of that. So yes, you can definitely use domestic strawberries and domestic strawberry leaves medicinally, and I have done that many times. I can tell you my own experience with using strawberry leaves in a tincture form to deal with canker sores has been extraordinary. And I was using domestic strawberries out of my yard. I mean, to be fair, my yard is not well watered, not well tended, which we've discussed. But even with all of that said, they were still very much domestic strawberries. I think they were California seaside strawberries. Right. So really big, giant, juicy fruits. Yeah. And I used the leaves from those. I picked them before the strawberries had begun. They had just begun to bloom, but they hadn't started fruiting yet. So I picked a bunch of leaves. I made a folk-style method tincture and then used the tincture in a blend with, I think I used lawn daisies as well. And I mixed the two together in the blend, and then I used that for canker sores. They were ones that I had, but then also at the time my son was about 5 years old, and he was having a canker sores off and on. And I can't remember if there was stress in his life or what the deal was, but they were happening. They were really unpleasant. He was willing to take the tincture and swish it around, which is what you do in this particular case. It did the job. It's very painful when you first do it, just as rubbing anything on a canker sore is very painful. But it cleared them up very, very fast. And so he was willing to do it multiple times through that year, each time they came up, because it worked the first time. And we're talking about a kid who was not really willing to withstand pain for any reason.
Oh, like his father.
Yeah. So, yes, strawberry leaves can be used medicinally, whether they're wild or not. If you have the opportunity to use wild strawberry leaves, I would recommend it. But if what you've got is the domestic, go for it.
Perfect. All right. Well, till next time, put an herb on it.
The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.